questions, put them to Elizabeth, and if she believes, as she said, if she thinks it's worth sort of raising at the time, she will. If not, we'll come back at the end and pick it up as part of our discussion. So right, I'll get started. So I want to sort of, if this works, here we go. Start off with a bit of a story, and some of you probably have already heard of this. But back in the 50s, there was a major outbreak of malaria in Borneo. People started dying pretty dramatically, significantly. And so this was the point in time the World Health Organization, excuse me, had just come into being. And so everyone sort of called out for help, the World Health Organization. They checked out the situation quickly and came back and acted on it almost immediately. And what they did was they sprayed DDT, pretty severe solid chemical that definitely killed the mosquitoes. And all was good. The death rates stopped, and people went back to their normal lives. And then after a while, sort of interesting things started to happen again. And the first of the major things that sort of were a bit strange was that the thatch on the roofs of the huts in the villages started to cave in, and that was followed in a very short time by an outbreak of typhus or the plague. And so the panic happened again, and the hands went up. World Health Organization, please help us. We've got a bigger problem. And so the World Health Organization thought, gee, we just fixed the problem. What happened here? So this time they sent a team down to have a look and try and understand exactly what was going on. And what they found was that essentially what they were seeing was a result of their actions in spraying DDT to kill the mosquitoes to solve the first problem. And what had happened was, in the food chain, the DDT killed the mosquitoes, but it also ended up killing a particular species of wasp. And the wasp used to feed on a particular species of caterpillar, and when the wasp population disappeared, the caterpillar population exploded, and the thatch on the roofs was their food. So they pretty much ate the roofs, and they started to fall in. The second thing that happened was that the DDT that killed the mosquitoes were then eaten by the local geckos. But these guys were pretty hardy, so it didn't affect them. But through biomagnification, the levels of DDT built up in their body, and the cats that ended up eating the geckos died. And the results was that the cat population got almost wiped out, and that resulted in an explosion of the rat population. And we had an outbreak of the plague. And what we found over here is that good intentions, but essentially unintended consequences when we don't actually think the situation through. And systems thinking is a methodology or a framework that helps us recognize that and understand that. And you've probably seen this graphic of the iceberg model, but it's a classic. It's something that I've come to use a lot of times and come to rely on. And it really shows us that there is superficial stuff in terms of what we see. And if we deal with the events or the symptoms, we end up never really fixing the problem. We actually end up causing more problems. And to really improve the quality of our solutions, we've actually got to go below the surface. We've got to understand at the first tier down what the patterns of behaviors might be, understand the architectures below that, and at the very bottom of it, the models or the mental models that are driving the behaviors and the architectures. And so that's really what I want to focus on. And I killed it here, but if you didn't see that, so the question really was, so how do you think the World Health Organization did come back and solve the problem the second time around? And interestingly enough, they did think about it. They did now recognize there was a series of relationships and interactions, and so they decided to play it safe. And the solution to the problem was to literally parachute cats into Borneo so that it was an organic, clean solution. It's probably, the legend has become myth now, but it's an absolutely true story. You can look it up. You just do a search for Operation Cat Drop, and you'll find the story behind it, and there's some really good videos on it too. Systems thinking and the iceberg model, as I said, is foundational to helping us understand it. And system thinking has come up with a number of systems archetypes that we can use as references. And I'm just going to share two of them, but there's a whole heap of them that you can look up, and they apply to pretty much most situations we might come across. And the first one is the fixes that backfire. And that's really the example of the cats in Borneo. We have a problem. The problem was the symptom was what was looked at, and there was a quick fix applied to the symptom. That quick fix had unintended consequences. Those consequences came back, vicious circle, and caused bigger problems. The other example quickly is the shifting the burden problem. The shifting the burden problem is where we know what the real problem is, but we don't have the wherewithal or the time or the money to deal with the real problem. So we say, we'll just fix we'll put a quick fix in now and we'll come back to fix the real problem afterwards. And as we know, that typically seldom happens. And so what happens is that we fix the symptom, the problem appears to go away, and then the momentum to fix your problem sort of goes away as well. But what happens is that the side effects that then result actually cause additional problems, and they further exacerbate the situation in a way that was never intended. It makes it harder to fix in the longer term as well. I'll give you quick examples of these. So one example of fixes that backfire, a quick fix, but also probably could move into the shifting the burden. The situation in North India. It's up in the state of Jammu and Kashmir. It's been an ongoing saga for a long time. And why that problem exists today was a quick fix that was implemented as part of the partition of India. In order to get the state to cede to India and not to Pakistan at the time, the Indian constitution or the constitution was amended with Article 370 that gave the state special rights. And the idea was that you would get special rights if you decided to be part of the Indian side of things, as opposed to wanting to be a separate state or want to be part of Pakistan. And those special rights then didn't sit well with, over time, didn't sit well with the rest of the country, and really resulted in a whole heap of turmoil, and the resolution that was reached last year in October to essentially take back that and revert it back to the standard constitution applying to everyone is now really causing a whole heap of problems over there. The other one about shifting the burden is where we really try and do good things for a short time. So we have people dying of hunger and famine. And we think that, we want to give them food to make them get better. And we never actually go back and fix the real problem as to why the famine is happening, or why are people homeless, why people don't have food. And what happens is we introduce this quick fix, and then we have secondary issues starting to pop up. We have social issues, we have mafia starting to form. We have cartels that then take control of that. And it really makes the situation even worse to handle. And in that context, think about what we're in now with the COVID-19 situation. Think about the number of quick fixes that have gone in to get us globally, in the royal sense, to where we are today. And which of these are really fixes targeted at what's really causing this virus and the situation we're in? What side effects, unintended consequences will follow? For example, personal one, I went and did a fair bit of look into the COVID Safe app, and I've written a separate paper on it, but the rush situation of getting that out to get it done without actually going through a proper systems process. Personally, I have grave concerns about what could happen with the data and the precedent that we're setting in that space, and it's worth looking at that. But a whole heap of other things, and we'll come back to the discussion as to what we might think of things that might happen over there. This is a good reference if you're interested. David Peter Straub, Systems Thinking for Social Change, and he has a table on page 67 that actually lists a whole heap of system archetypes that pretty much cover the gamut of the situations we see in the world today, and how we should be dealing with them, and how we can recognize that we're dealing with a symptom or we're actually fixing it for the longer term. So what is systems thinking? Well, basically it's applying these principles and recognizing this, but what is it and how do we do it? Peter Senge, but I'm guessing most of you are familiar with, pioneer in the field of systems thinking, has a definition, and that's on the screen over there. My personal view is that it is a framework that really helps us to understand and make sense of the world we live in, to be able to deal with that from two fundamental perspectives, efficiently and effectively, and I'll come back to that, with the challenges we perceive, and then to create the reality we desire. And I absolutely believe, and I hopefully demonstrate this, that modeling and simulation go hand in hand with systems thinking to really make it all happen and make the concepts usable and feasible. So how do we understand a system? I'm going to use the example of my little aircraft design from my university days, which, by the way, is also what I've used in the logo, as you should probably work out, to try and explain the concept. So how do we understand a system? So we can think about it, but typically the word that comes up is we analyze it. The concept of analysis comes into being. And interestingly, analysis is, first of all, it's a three-step process. And it's about looking into the system. We look at the system, we break it up into its subsystems or its parts, and then we break those down again until we get to the point at which we understand what they do. We then understand the interactions between the parts, and then we aggregate that back up to understand what the system is in terms of how it works and what it does. Now, the thing that aeronautical engineering or anything to do with aerospace teaches you very quickly is that interdependence is absolutely fundamental. In other words, you can't take one part and optimize the part in itself. You have to think of the system as a whole, and you only change a part and its behaviors if it makes the whole better. And aircraft engineering or aeronautical engineering forces you down that track because of the fact that it's got to fly and you got to balance things out. But that principle is fundamental to any system, that it's all about the interactions. It's not about the parts themselves. It's about the interactions and the relationships. And while this then gives us a definition for what a system is, and it's a definition focused around the concept of analysis. It's about looking into a system, and it defines a system as a set of interdependent parts that come together to define a set of unique behaviors and properties that only the system has. So the method of analysis is all about looking in. It's about understanding the architecture, the structure, the organization of systems in terms of its component parts and the interactions. So it answers the question of how a system works, and it tells you something about what it does. But it doesn't answer the complete system of what a system should do. And the interesting thing is that this methodology, analysis, has been the predominant method of thinking, of understanding systems for pretty much the industrial age, for the last century. In fact, science was the search for the smallest part. We went down, we started with atoms, and went down to electrons and so on, and we ended up with the standard model of physics, which is the elementary particles that make up reality as we see it. Essentially based on the concept of analysis. Keep breaking things down until you get to the smallest bit, understand those bits, and then by understanding the bits, you understand the whole. Biology was the cells. And any educational institution, any theory you look at, it's based fundamentally on the concept of analysis. And analysis is good, but it has its limitations. And one of the limitations is it fundamentally focuses on the how. It doesn't tell you what the system does completely. It tells you what you think it does by looking at it, but what it does completely. To understand what a system does, you actually have to look outside the system. You have to look at what other systems is it a part of, and then through those relationships, understand the system. And that method is called synthesis. So in this context, if to understand really what the system must do, we need to understand its environmental context, the environment that it operates in, and the other systems that it interacts with. And by the way, you can replace the aircraft model in the middle with pretty much anything. The principle still applies. And so we end up with a second definition of what a system is that a system then is a whole that's defined by its essential functions within the larger systems that it is a part of. And that's what defines the behaviors of what the system must do. So we have two methods for understanding systems. Analysis, looking in to understand organization and structure. Synthesis, looking out. So they answer the how and the what question, but they don't completely answer the why question. To understand, for example, we can do analysis and synthesis, but we will never understand why the color of the navigation lights on an aircraft are green on one side and red on the other. To understand the why question, we have to look back at time and look forward at future projections. We essentially have to look at the genesis of the system. Where did it come from, and where does it want to go, and where it currently exists. And now we have a third prong to understanding systems. So we understand system how by looking in through analysis, through this understanding its structure. We understand system by knowing what, by looking at the greater context within which the system operates. And we understand the system in terms of why, through its heritage and its aspirations. And we have essentially three perspectives or definitions of understanding systems. And you choose the appropriate one depending on the context that you want to live in, to look at and understand, but really to holistically understand the system, we have to apply all three all of the time. Quick definition of modeling and simulation. I'm not going to spend too much time on this, most of you guys know this, but really it's all pervasive. We use it every day in almost everything we do, whether we realize it or not. And it complements systems thinking. And so I'm going to jump into the bit now, show you what that is with the quick couple of definitions first. A simulation is a model plus execution. So it's those two parts to it. What is a model? A model is essentially an abstraction for a particular purpose of some aspect of reality. And the point over here is the underlined words. It's an abstraction. It's a limited sense of what that reality is. And that limitation is for that purpose. So it's focused and targeted fidelity is what a model is all about. A simulation essentially is a method of implementing that model over time. And we have some examples of simulations, and I've only used the training context because that's something that's really close to home for me and a lot of people that I work with. And we have different categories of simulations that you're seeing over there. So there's a live training, live simulation, firefighters, there's a virtual of aircraft and flight training, constructive simulation where it's all done in the computers, and then a human simulation or in a healthcare context. And we also have virtual reality and augmented reality to sort of blend across and integrate across these. But I'm not going to go into more detail on that. If you've got time in discussion, we will do that. And a simulator is a tool that executes the simulation. So the word of caution, again, coming back to the fact that George Box's words over here, that by its very nature, by definition, a simulation, because of the fact it's built on models, is never true for everything. It's for the cases that it's particularly defined for, and we've got to be very sensitive of that aspect. I want to step across now to another concept, essentially two foundational concepts that I found really valuable in applying and in learning and in doing what I do. And that is how we understand the world around us. So it starts off with everything at the basic, at the atomic level is data. It doesn't have any meaning. It's numbers, names, places are all data. We process that data to make it information. So we add meaning to it. Who, where, when, what, how many, through descriptions. And now it starts to mean something. We then convert that through instruction in terms of how to use it into skills and competencies, and we call that knowledge. And the basis of our educational institutions are essentially building up this steering from data to information to knowledge. And then there's a step change that happens as we try and understand the knowledge that we have to make it understanding. And that understanding in terms of explanation is answered by the why question. And as we go up this continuum, we get better at what we do. Our efficiency increases and our value increases. And then there's, interestingly, the whole process that we're doing so far is learning, and it's very much systematic. It's one step after the next. And a step change happens when we start to apply the knowledge that we learn through understanding, and it becomes wisdom. And that step change happens by applying the concepts that we learn in particular environments that we're in. And it's through that application in those environments that we develop an understanding of what that knowledge actually means and how we're then able to extend it, to extrapolate it, to apply it in different contexts. And we have two fundamental concepts over here that help us understand the reality we're in: efficiency and effectiveness. Efficiency is about doing things right. It's all about knowledge and about knowing how to do stuff. Effectiveness is that step change that happens when we go beyond that into actual application and understanding. And it's about knowing why things are to be done. The difference between efficiency and effectiveness is the difference between knowledge and wisdom. And this is just a personal belief. Knowledge, I believe, is something that can be taught. Wisdom is not. Wisdom is something that must be learned, and it comes from applying that knowledge in the environmental context that we each of us have, so that we can actually then make decisions and directions that will take us to the right place effectively. So I'll come back to those two fundamental concepts and hopefully bring this together in a sense. But I quickly want to just talk about now the engineering process itself and how we do that. And so the whole idea of the systems engineering process is to take something that's a concept and turn it into reality. So we have something that we're thinking about, we would like to have a need, and translate that to reality. We might, and I'll come back to why I've used this, we might want to create a flying saucer, for want of a better thing. And we want to take that into and do something with it to, to fly into space. And in systems engineering then is pretty much a linear process where, we go through these stages, and you're not going to go into detail, but I think most of you are probably familiar with this: requirements, design, development, integration, testing, and so on. And we establish various baselines along the way. So we have a list of requirements, we have a functional baseline, we translate that into a physical architecture, we define that physical architecture, we build a physical architecture, we test it, and we deliver it. And we have various reviews that the system engineering process defines that says that we're checking along the way. Have we got a reasonable requirements baseline, so the requirements done? Have we got a design done? Are we ready for testing and acceptance and so on? Now that is usually associated or understood as a systems engineering process. But what we find is that it's pretty much a systematic process. It follows a series of steps. The focus is on the physical, and it's a progression towards realization of a physical system. Whether you do it iteratively, or whether you do it using a waterfall model, agile, whatever you do, the idea is you're gathering requirements, you're coming up with the design, you're building something, but the focus is on the tangible, on the physical. And what that means is that most of the times we develop systems, they're developed by specialists. And you have to talk to the specialists to understand what's going on. And to correct the system, you have to bring the specialists in. And it's very much built on that concept of analysis, and our educational frameworks where we become engineers in aerospace or mechanical, electrical, or computer scientists, or we develop a trade where we really are focused on the how to build stuff. INCOSE has a definition, which, by the way, significantly improved last year, which still sort of, which is much improved. The previous one was very much a process focus. But to me, it's still a bit lacking in terms of what it actually says, and it still has that process focus to it. What I believe, and what I want to share with you now, is what I think the systems engineering process is all about, and how we bring systems thinking and modeling and simulation into it. And the first point over here, is, you probably heard of this, is that everything is created twice, first in the mind and then in reality, right? So we have two creations: a conceptual model in someone's head, and then the actual system, which really is a model as well, but it's the real thing as it's built. And the engineering process, or how we systems engineer a thing, we actually create two additional models. So there are actually 4 models of the system, and the process creates 2 more if we actually do it systemically and using modeling and simulation. So the first model that gets created, in addition to what's in someone's head, is the need to capture that model and to create a replication of that can be shared, that everyone can understand, that is going to now develop the system. And it's not just sitting in individuals' heads. And we call that a conceptual or a functional model of the system. In the current context, in the main, the way it's done is it's capturing a series of requirements. It's very flat, and it's improving in terms of tools and methodologies that are coming out. But the essence of it is that we are creating a model of the system, and the competencies that are needed are modeling competencies to be able to do that right. And it's not happening explicitly. It's implicit. Where people understand it, they do it well. Where they don't understand it, it's a pretty crap job of it. And the way to do that right is, again, to understand the system, it's not just about analysis, but it's about analysis, synthesis, and genesis. To understand what's in someone's head and to translate that into a model, we have to go through those 3 phases. It is implementation agnostic. The context of requirements engineering is not about requirements analysis. It's about capturing dreams and creating a conceptual architecture of what that is that can be shared. We then take that conceptual architecture and we create a second model of the system, a physical model, which is based on the tangibles, which is the stuff that we're familiar with mostly, the stuff we get educated on at universities. We create mechanical models, software models, hardware, and so on. And the essence of the systems engineering process then is to then translate that into a reality through building that model. And that happens at the end of what we deliver. So that model is implementation specific. That's where we get the technologists, the subject matter experts in, and the guys that actually understand the technology. And between the two models, we apply concepts that ensure that we do it right by building the models right, and the concept of verification ensures that, and that's through knowledge, knowing how we're doing the job we're supposed to do. We have software engineers, hardware engineers, subject matter experts, training specialists, people that know their job and have the knowledge to do the job. And then we complement that through validation or effectiveness so that we've done the right job. And that is by building the right models. And that, in essence, if you had to look at what systems engineering or the engineering of systems is all about, is that process of taking something that's in someone's head or a number of people's heads, translating that into a common model and translating that model into a capability that can be delivered. And the thing to remember in all of this, that if we believe that's the case, then to assure the integrity of that model requires it to be, sorry, just call come in there on time, yeah. We have to preserve the integrity of those models. And if we do that, now we can have discussions about what the model does at a conceptual level that's completely technology agnostic, without having to have specialists involved. And you don't have the situation over there where you have to say, trust me, and I know it's doing. It's doing it because you understand the model conceptually. Moving on very quickly into applying these concepts of systemic thinking, modeling, and simulation to something that's happening globally. Most of you are probably familiar. The UN came up with a set of 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Amazing stuff that we really need to have to consider. But if you look at all of these goals, the thing that's, notwithstanding the fact that they're fundamental things, the thing that stands out is that they're all interdependent. You can't fix any one of these without touching the other. And the corollary is that really to fix these, there is more to it than just fixing them individually. It's not about the parts, it's about the sum of the whole. And I'll bring back the iceberg model again. Now, if you actually look at the way the UN sustainability goals have been identified and articulated, they're really focused on the surface. In the main, there are some that go deeper, but in the main, they're focused on outcomes. So what does that tell us? That if we focus on trying to fix these individually, are we going to come up with viable solutions that will be long-term solutions? Probably not. So systems thinking tells us that we need to go below the surface. So what sits below the surface of these UN goals? It's the systems that enable them. And these are not all of them, but the main systems. We have political systems, technological systems, economic systems, social systems, environmental systems. And I'm calling it systems of systems because each of these systems has got a framework within which it operates that's different to any of the other systems. And that's what makes it a number of different systems interacting. And they interact. They're all interdependent. They're all interconnected. There are interrelationships between them. But what's sitting below them? And when we think of what's sitting below them, at the end level, it's really the human. It's the human system that underlies all of this and is sitting below it. And what drives the human system? It's a set of basic human needs. Maxford Neef has got a classification that I find to be pretty useful in this regard, where he breaks it down along these axiological terms into the fundamental human needs that need to be considered. If we think of every human as an individual, subsistence, protection, understanding, participation, idleness or leisure, whichever you want to look at it, two ends to it, the ability to be able to create stuff, have identity and freedom. And if you think about the UN's goals, to really solve these UN goals and really to make the world a better place. These goals are more a measure of our humanity in a sense. And to fix them, we can't focus on the surface, notwithstanding the fact they're independent, but we have to go down. We have to go down to understand the systems that work to enable them, understand these underlying systems and relationships, but at the fundamental level, it's about human dignity. It's about looking at the human that's sitting underneath, and what are the mental models that are driving it, that are causing it, and causing the behaviors, causing the systems and the results that we're seeing as symptoms that have been articulated as these SDGs. Almost, I'm getting towards the end. I realize running out of time over here. So just to recap and to finish off on a slightly different note. So how do we understand systems? I call this understanding systems with gas. Just a easy term to look at it and remember it. Genesis, analysis, and synthesis. Depending on the perspective, if you try to understand the architecture of a system, it's analysis. If you're trying to understand what the requirements are, what it needs to do, it's synthesis. And if you understand behaviors of why things happen the way they do, it's really about genesis. And it's about the evolution of the system in terms of both its architecture and its environment and the relationships that exist in both those areas and the aspirations of that system. And a human system is no different in this regard. Just as a technological system is no different. We have to think about its architecture and its structure, and we have to think about its obsolescence and how we're going to sustain it. But the interesting thing is this method then of as I said, of gas is enabled by systems model, as I pointed out in that life cycle. Two fundamental models in the main, but there are many applications, functional and physical. But really, if you think about the human system and how we as humans do what we do, it actually applies as well in that context to how we create the reality that we live in. Very literally and simplistically, our left brain is the analytical part, as they say, it looks at the detail, it looks inside, understands the architectures, how things work. Our right brain is looking at the synthesis aspect of it. How do relationships come into play? How do we interconnect? And we are a result of our genesis, our genetic heritage, where our genetics came from, our cultural heritage, our traditional heritage, our belief systems, the mental models that we develop. And so really, if you think about that, and these two guys have done a great job at doing it, and the one in particular, I've already mentioned Peter Senge, and he mentioned the concept of mental models, how they're so deeply ingrained that we don't even realize that we're using them and knowing them. But Umberto Maturana, I'm guessing the lighting is very small, the guy on the left, he actually came up with a theory that I think is absolutely fascinating, the Santiago theory of cognition, where he talks about the fact that we as humans create our reality. He coined the term autopoiesis, self-creation. And the point is that our brain is creating our reality, we're creating our reality through our senses. Our brain doesn't see, it doesn't hear, it doesn't touch, it doesn't feel, it just gets signals. We integrate those signals in, we create models of what we believe reality to be, and then we're simulating those models all of the time to project what we think it's going to be, and we make decisions based on those. And he succinctly summarized that by saying, we don't perceive the world we see the world we perceive. So in other words, every single one of us has a perception of what that reality is. And by the way that this reality is created, it's individual. And every single one of us carries our own reality of the world around us. And where we tend to agree on that, we call it normality. And where we don't, we end up having problems and we give it different names. But the concept that he really went on that really comes home to me on this is when we realize that, and we then make the statement that where we tell someone else what is real, what we're actually saying is we want you, it really is the demand for obedience. It's saying that I have the truth, you don't. And so the concept here is that recognizing this is a fundamental element to me of humanity and the very essence of compassion. And so the question is, how do can we change our mental models? So we've grown these over time. How would we change our mental models? And just to finish off, I just want to bring in this Thomas Edison, one of the greatest inventors of all time, and who really, he was able to come up with innovative ideas out of the blue pretty much. And a technique that he used to actually improve his creativity was quite an interesting one, because he believed that we had to disconnect from our conscious mind to be able to go back into our subconscious. And then we would take our assumptions away, and our possibilities would open up. I was lucky enough to actually get out to Fort Myers last year as one of the NCOSI conferences, and went and visited the site, and I took this photo of this statue of Edison. And you'll notice in the statue, in his hand, there is essentially it's a steel ball, a ball bearing. And the story behind it is that what he used to do is, whenever he was looking for inspiration or innovation or ideas, he would need to disconnect from the conscious. And the way he'd do that, he would sit down with a set of ball bearings in his hand, in his favorite chair, and he'd put his hand over the side of the chair, and on the ground there was a tin plate. And the idea was that as he was about to doze off, he would let the ball bearings would fall out of his hand because he was falling asleep, and would wake him up. And at the point that he was dozing off, he would be disconnected from his conscious, and his subconscious mind would open up, and he'd come up with a whole lot of ideas. And so how do we change our mental models? I think that the first thing is, we have to learn things that we are not taught. It's about growing into that environment and opening up to stuff and learning things for ourselves. But the most important thing is about reflection. We have to make time to reflect, because it's through reflection where we disconnect from the concept of our conscious reality, of the assumptions that we built up, that we then have the opportunity to change our mental models. Probably the reason why meditation has become something that's become very popular in the world today. So to wrap up, the iceberg model, a great metaphor. If anything that you take away, this is a classic and will help every time. Are we looking at a symptom, or are we really trying to understand the problem and fix it at the root cause? The deeper we go, the better the leverage. This diagram, I want to finish off with, it really says it so well, better than any of the words that I could say. Everything we know and everything we believe to be real, in other words, what we think is true, is an abstraction. It's a model of reality as we perceived it, of what the truth is, but it's not the truth. It's an abstraction. We might get close to it, but our human existence is limiting in that regard to allow us to have that completely. Our mental models of reality are built up through genesis, analysis, synthesis. They form our belief systems. They are the framework within which we make choices and decisions. And those choices and decisions are essentially simulations of our models as we react to events around us. René Descartes sort of said it in a similar sense to Umberto Maturana. He sort of said, we do not describe the world we see the world that we can describe. He went on to make another statement that I'm sure most of you probably recall or have heard. I think, therefore I am. I think I want to add to that. So in this context, so who am I? And who I am is inherently my heritage, my genetic, cultural, traditional, my environment and its relationships, how I interact with people around me and everything in my environment, and my aspirations. This is what makes me, this is who I am, and this is what will continue to make me. And without any of all of these things, really there is no me. That's the last slide. These are the people that I found absolute amazing in terms of this sort of stuff. I think this is stuff that to me personally has been groundbreaking, changed the way I understand the world and how I believe. Look them up. I think each of us is on this journey. Great information. Systems thinking, Russell Aikoff, absolutely amazing. System dynamic modeling, Donella Meadows started it all off. Mentioned the other two, Carl Jung, took it the next step in terms of really saying, what makes us in terms of humans. Having said that, I'll stop over there, and Elizabeth, maybe hand back to you, and we've got a bit of time. Apologies for taking a bit longer than I anticipated for questions.
Okay, hang on, I'm just there we go. So I guess the first question I've got is some questions for JB. That's blown me away, JB, but I'm hoping other people have got some questions to sort of start the conversation.
I'm a bit nervous to ask this question, JB, but there's a lot of people who say that we actually exist in a simulation, that we live, our existence is inside a simulation. Would you care to comment on that?
The simple answer, Philip, is we absolutely do, in the context of we're simulating it all in our brains. But that's not the question you were asking. I think, but inherently, we are simulating everything that we see as reality, our beliefs. It's all happening in our heads. But I think you're talking about what we touch and feel. Is that a simulation as well? And that question is an interesting one. I think we have to come back to definitions. You have to come back to definitions. And if the problem is that our definition is based on the simulation that's happening in our head. So we're saying that a simulation out there is an abstraction of reality, and we're pre-assuming that reality exists. Mm-hmm. And the question we're asking now, what is reality? And I'll quickly, the point that sort of got me sort of going in that area was, or is the questioning is, you have to come back to how do we understand the world, and science is physics, right? So we look at physics and we understand reality through physics in the main. And if you look at physics, there are two perspectives. So we have Einstein and relativity, and physics on a large scale. So it's about Newton equations of motion, the gravitational constant. We can work out what the forces of gravity are, and so on. And so it's a model of the world on a large scale. And then you go to quantum mechanics, and quantum mechanics is a model of the world on a small scale. And the interesting thing is that those two models don't interoperate. They're not compatible. Mm-hmm. So what that's telling me is that those models are abstractions of reality. They're perspectives. And we haven't actually understood what the truth is. It's in that diagram that I had before. We have the cylinder. And on one side, you have quantum mechanics. On the other side, you have relativity and quantum mechanics. And is the world out there a simulation? I don't know, but all I know is that everything we know and understand the world through our senses, through the models that we use, physics, science, whatever it is, they're all abstractions. And we know that they're abstractions because when we extend them to a point, they then start to fall apart. The abstractions don't work anymore. And that is the biggest clue that we're actually at the limits of our abstraction, when the model doesn't work. And that's when we learn and grow, is when we realize those models don't work. And to finish off that point, if you look at how science started off and still is pretty much the search for to break it down into particles. And we look at that, and everything is about breaking it down and finding the particles, and then we build it back up. But there is no equivalent right now that talks about the conceptual. We talk about quantum mechanics, and we have the dichotomy between waves and particles. And the question that comes up is, where does consciousness fit into all this? Now we have some clues. We know, for example, that gravity only seems to work on the particles. It doesn't work on the electromagnetic. And so is there something there that we haven't worked out yet, where our consciousness is shaping the electromagnetic to create the reality that is the tangible? Are we doing it? And we don't realize we're doing it. I personally think we are. I just haven't worked out how yet. But sorry, a bit of a long-winded thing, but there you go.
Thanks for that. Yep. I guess the fundamental point is that everyone should join Simulation Australasia, because we're all simulations in one way or another.
Yeah. Yeah.
And there's the motto for us. Thanks.
Yes. Actually, to quickly on that, I think the other body that I really, that I'm a part of now is CISA, the Systems Engineering Society of Australia. And if there's one thing that I would like to see happen eventually, is the coming together, and I'm putting it out, is of the entity that is CISA and the entity that is Simulation Australasia, because I fundamentally believe that systems thinking, modeling, and simulation are at the very essence the foundational building blocks of understanding the world and making it a better place. Yeah, sorry, Elizabeth, go on here.
No, I was going to say you've probably got a very, very supportive audience, but nobody's asking questions. Everybody's listening.
Sorry.
So please, somebody else, a question.
You had a lot of interesting quotes on your slides that we went through very quickly. Can we get a copy of the slides? Because I'd like to look at some of those closer.
JB?
Yeah, sure. I'll make a copy available. If there's an easy way to share it, let me know, or just send me a message on LinkedIn or whatever, and I'll send them.
Okay, well, that'll be over to Dale and me, I guess.
Yeah, and we will be sharing the video. So if you want to actually listen to JB going through the slides again, it'll be up on YouTube at some point soon, and Dale can provide links to where you can find that. And that's true for all the Sim Cafe talks.
And if you need anything quickly, Shani, send an email to admin@simos.com and just put in it JB quotes, and I'll make sure it comes through if you need them quickly. Thanks. Some other people, come on, fellas. JB has knocked you all out of the park.
I don't have a question. I've just got a comment that if you ever start a church, JB, sign me up.
No, thanks, man. We got enough of them, I think. Yeah.
It's just nice when you see passion showing through.
Yeah.
This is Peter Needham speaking.
Yes.
One of the challenges we have is growing and developing systems engineers. You know, practically nobody comes out of university kind of being qualified in systems engineering to any extent. And you know, we go through, as you talked about earlier on, we go through the usual, you know, understanding systems engineering process and all that kind of stuff. Do you have any suggestions for ways of improving the way in which young engineers are developed in the future?
Yeah, I think you're very right. But the sad part is that the educational system and the teaching of systems engineering is very much focused on a systematic process and not a systemic methodology. And it's absolutely silent on modeling and simulation altogether in terms of explicit competencies. We talk about systems concepts, we talk about you know, processes, but the essence of it is, I think, missed, and that's partly due to the fact that the genesis of systems engineering itself comes from engineering, and it comes from the technical disciplines of engineering, which are very much focused on the how domain. And I think we're trying to improve that. I think INCOSI is working in a bigger picture to come up with evolving the definitions of what systems engineering is. In fact, there's and that's happening through the integration of system sciences, system dynamics, and the core systems engineers to help bring the three together. And it's a work in progress. From an institutional perspective, I think it will probably take some time. And one way perhaps to do that is to probably have more of these sorts of forums where we get people in to really recognize the core essence of what this is all about. To do the system engineering that the universities provide, because it is a foundational sort of a layer there. But I think it comes back to bodies such as CISA, such as Simulation Australasia, starting to play a bigger role in academia, to help guide some of that. SimOst is looking at professionalizing modeling and simulation. CISA has got a framework in place for professionalizing systems engineers. The thing is, we've got to try and bring those together a bit more. And I think that's part of the challenge. But I'd appreciate maybe Elizabeth and Philip's thoughts on that too. And I noticed that Bill's on the call too, so feel free, Bill, to jump in and talk about this. Bill's the president of CISA, by the way, so yeah.
Well, there was an invitation. Go for it, Bill.
Oh, no, I think it's a hard act to follow. I think we will be putting out some information about our plans for future events, including a virtual forum coming up in a couple of weeks' time, and our next year's integrated project engineering congress. I think Phil knows about that, but we're trying to get a number of different societies together that are all sort of pushing along the same area of interest. So yeah, we'll be pushing information about that out shortly. But yeah, congratulations, JB. Excellent talk.
Yeah, I'll second that, and thanks, Bill. I'm not an engineer. I'm working with engineers at a couple of universities in Sydney, and to answer that question, Peter, my observation is that it lies very much in what Peter Senge calls that mental models. Each engineering subdiscipline sees itself as a whole world, and it's not terribly interested. Well, the individuals teaching in it become so engaged in that they find it difficult to make connections at the boundaries. And I think what CISA and JB and that are talking, we're talking about the boundaries, and that's really difficult. That's where all the hard work is. So
yeah,
but I'm glad I'm working with some people who are doing that. Yeah. Any questions? Thanks, Peter. Over to you.
No, I was just thank you. I agree. I think for me, the best systems engineers are always the ones that have the sort of an inquisitiveness about the sort of the bigger, broader picture.
Yeah.
And that's something that's kind of hard to talk, but perhaps we can do a bit more to encourage people to think about that kind of thing.
I was going to add to that I think it's not just working with the universities. We have to go back even earlier than that. And in terms of the STEM outreach that everyone's familiar with, we should include that kind of thinking, critical thinking and systems thinking in the way that we approach the STEM outreach and the kind of things that we put as projects to interest high school students and even primary school students when they're still very curious and the system hasn't constrain their curiosity, to keep up that way of thinking and to look at things systematically and systemically and not just get burrowed down into the knowledge aspect of a particular topic.
Yeah, I agree. Thanks, Phil. And it's almost 2 o'clock. If there are no more questions, I just wanted to ask everybody to, in whatever way you like, give JB a great thanks. That was a very passionate and engaging talk, and I'm really looking forward to listening to it again and sort of seeing those images. So thanks, JB. That was great.
Thanks.
As always.
Thank you very much. Cheers.
So for next week, just before everybody goes, Nick is, and our speaker next week is Nick Watt, who's
great.
And I have a short note that says Nick will be talking to us about, I've lost it, League of Legends, how a simple change increased sales 100%, or in brackets, or how an initial product goal can create an expensive, underused feature. And Nick's innovation and disruptive consultant at Innoco. I think that's right. I hope, Nick, I got that right. Print's a bit small here. So looking forward to that next week. Thanks.
Absolutely.
For coming. We'll close off and see this online as soon as we can. And that's it. And thanks,
Yep.
Dale. I managed it all.
Well done, Elizabeth.
I went into panic mode, but it worked.
Yeah. Have a great weekend, everyone.
Thanks, Elizabeth.
Thanks,
Guys.
Thanks again, JB.